Hey everyone, this is Nathaniel Blossom, the Archetype Intuitive, and today I am going to try and talk about the concept of good versus evil. I am still kind of learning to do videos and getting comfortable with it, so please bear with me in my folly if things aren't quite that well polished. So I'm just kind of rambling live and hoping that things get communicated as I would most like. So good versus evil is probably a philosophical concept that most every human has thought about in some way at some time or another. And so I want to include, when we think about good and bad or good and evil, I also want to use a few other dual words to kind of look at the sense of polarity there. So we've got good versus evil, right versus wrong, virtue versus vice, truth and lies, reality and delusion, unity or oneness, and separation. And so to encapsulate that, in the good column, we have good, right, virtue, truth, reality, unity, and oneness. In the evil column, we have wrong, vice, lies, delusion, separation. So those two umbrellas tend to split and create a schism between two polar opposites. And I have found two terms that I would like to use when explaining this conceptually, that I'm taking from some of the Law of One material that I've been reading. And I've seen it in various places, but I do think it has originated kind of through that Law of One stuff. And so that is the idea of service to self and service to others. And service to self would kind of classify as the bad category, and service to others categories as the good. Although both of them are different learning paths, and I guess the good and bad connotation you can kind of find as we discuss it a little bit more. But I also need to clarify those two terms. Because people think, well, service to others, well, if you're just serving everybody else, you're forgetting about yourself and you're going to be a victim and just kind of lost. And people say, well, service to self, that can't be bad, because what about the virtue of selfishness? And you got to look after yourself. You got to be selfish somewhat to survive. All right, so let's clarify. Service to self as a path and a direction is implying service to self at the expense of others and exploiting others. So that kind of does make that one a downer Debbie after you think about it. Service to others is also been termed service to all because people have had problems with that terminology. But service to others implies serving everybody, serving the whole, what's going to be of the most use to the most people. And so the all and the total you are a part of. So service to others includes serving the self, just not at the expense of others. It's working within the whole as part of it. Um, so that's a major distinction. In the service to others path, we have an axiom of do no harm, doing the least amount of harm possible. Service to self doesn't have that, because you can walk all over someone else as long as you're getting what you want, because it's all about the self, and glorifying that ego and kind of the putting you on a pedestal above others. Service to self tends to classify things into a schism of superior and inferior. So anytime you think you're better than or worse than someone else, you have fallen into a service to self state. Um, it also is reflected in all predator and prey relationships. So something eating something else to survive. And so we should see immediately that, well, we all eat to survive. And so what's going on there? As humans in physical bodies, we are subject to animal nature and we do have to eat to live. And therefore, we are service to self beings at our physical base, although we are able to reach toward service to other tendencies, as we align in that direction. I kind of see the third density of humanity as kind of being this choice point, where the service to self kind of animalistic things are a lower self that we are still involved with, but we can also see above to a less dense area of consciousness in which we can aspire towards. So that's the fundamental difference in a nutshell. Let's look at a few things with that, though. So it kind of, you can boil it down, service to others, being a good person and doing things that help the whole. Got that. Service to self, hurting others. What are some examples of things that we could agree would be service to self? Um, Stealing. When you take something from someone else so that you have something and it's at a cost to them, then you have exploited and it's at their expense. Enslaving and manipulating and subjugating other people. That is also service to self because you are putting others under you. So anytime you are trying to control someone else for your personal gain, that is a service to self tendency. Also, the idea of killing should obviously seem like service to self, but as I said earlier, we all eat. And if you eat, then something must die so that you may live. Um, then you can see that even if you're a vegetarian, you're still killing a plant. And if you just ate fruit and nuts and seeds, you're still preventing a life. You're eating the seed that would be a life. So there is a cost when it comes to being in a body. And I actually kind of think that that's part of the karma that keeps us bound to die. But that's a little divergent, and I'll talk about that in a little bit maybe. Um, so we are all doing service to self things in some respect while we are aspiring to do less harm. Also want to clarify that doesn't mean, if you eat meat, you don't need to feel guilty. Everybody does what's right for them. And sometimes there's an exchange factor where if it sounds kind of weird, but a lesser evil to be of best use to the whole. And so there, if you are diminishing, if your body needs meat and you're not eating it, and you're malnourished, you aren't serving yourself or others. You're not serving the whole. So there is a tendency that it gets into an area that is expanded in some areas that we might not always know what is truly best, and that's why we are constantly trying to consciously grow for that. Another thing that goes along with a service to self pathway of evil comes around with lies. If you lie, you are blocking the truth, and it's creating an expense, and that the truth is being obstructed. Truth and reality is the essence of goodness, and so anything that is evil or service to self is somehow it's like the friction against what is. All there is a one universal, one total stream of life and energy expressing the truths of reality. Anything that is trying to separate from what it is, that's delusional. Anything that is blocking the stream of life that is acting counter to it would be such as a lie that's working counter to the truth. So I see evil as kind of like a force of friction or inertia that is kind of slowing. It literally retards the flow and the stream of life. And it's funny from a human perspective when we live in these bodies, there's something about the interplay of this service to self path with our service to others aspiration that creates the drama and the karma of life. It's not necessarily bad in and of itself, but it has to do with time. Everything that's service to self is an error. It's a sin where you miss the mark. You don't see the unity, the oneness. You're acting from a place of separation, which is delusional, and it is slowing down the flow of life. So in that way, it is, it's not optimal, but we're allowed to act in those ways because we're learning what truth is. We're learning what reality is. And slowly, through a lot of lessons and learnings, we in the human state of density we make a choice. We align with a service to self or a service to others path, and we can do service to self until we finally see, wait a second, I can't hurt someone else without hurting myself, and we align to service to others. But we can play with our free will through our vain imaginings about the delusion of separation all sorts of evils and darknesses in that way. Um, so I mean, we're constantly aspiring to do less harm, to do no harm. And so if we're honest with ourselves, we may see tendencies where we have glorified our own ego or said me first or taken something at the expense of someone else or anything that is treating others as something separate to be controlled, to be exploited. Any kind of thinking and mentality like that, like I'm going to get away with something, I'm going to get you, is a service to self path. And you can play that way until you see the backlash, the karma, the lesson, like, oh, wait, I did that and it kind of is hurting me too because I'm part of this whole picture. So when you see that sense of unity, you start to say, I don't want to hurt anybody because when I hurt other people, I hurt myself, which is the basis of what this good and evil conundrum boiled down to. Interestingly, the younger you are and the more unaware, you have a certain amount of grace that's afforded to you, which can be represented by the planet Jupiter and the sphere of Chesed on the Tree of Life. But you have grace because if Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If you don't know that something is bad, it's kind of like you're doing the least amount of harm. You're doing the best that you can with the consciousness you have. And so the lessons will redirect you, but it's all about the universe just wants you to be aware. So if you don't know, it just wants you to be aware. And so there's a more graceful way of figuring it out. The problem really sets in when you know something's wrong and you do it anyway. When you know the truth, when you know that we're all connected and that you're choosing to hurt somebody, then you are willfully acting against the law in the higher sense. And that's representative of Saturn, Bina, the law of the Tree of Life, and the idea of old age. So children and youth and folly have a certain amount of grace while they're learning. But in old age, when you already know right from wrong and you choose to do things that harm, then you fall under severity as opposed to mercy in a cosmic sense. And so the universe is growing us in awareness. And it's like if you like, well, I thought that was good, but now I know it's not. Well, you stop doing it. But if you're like, well, I'm going to keep doing it because I'm not really sure it's bad, eventually the ramifications will get louder so that you can figure out that you have stepped into separation and you are not in a state of unity. And again, the idea that there is a one supreme state of being that everything is participating in. I can't conceive of a philosophy that does not see everything, the sum total of everything being one. So we have one whole. The idea of trying to act and be separate from and not held responsible or accountable as part of that whole, but separate from, it's delusional to think that you can separate. And so it's not made in reality. All things through a service to self path are perpetuated through somebody trying to enact or literally acting out the idea of separation. And it can be done to an extent. The universe has a tendency to swallow up things that are missing the mark into a greater whole, making them work for a larger purpose. And so, small things that we do that may miss the mark and be harmful, they may not have as much harm, or they may be for a greater good in a larger context. And sometimes we don't even know what the greater good is, but the universe is always working toward the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Sometimes if the evil, of course, when you think about gratuitous violence and such, the more that something becomes a gross act, gross, large, ugly act of service to self, the universe may find louder ways to intervene and to cut out anything that is consistently cancerous in that regard. So there is something to, the universe that is wanting us to learn and wanting to show us things in a loving way, and it only it redirects us lovingly when it can, and then it gives us a smack if we're not getting it. So there's various levels to this. So while there is a clear cut, I see, right and wrong, good and evil. It's important to know that there is a spectrum of it, and that we are, aspiring towards the best state of being, to be, to do no harm. When you think about, doing absolutely no harm, it can be a rather large idea when you think about the small intricacies of everything that we do, and sometimes we don't know if something is, you know is this really for the best, or is this hurting somebody. We do the best with what we consciously know, and when we tune in and we intend to do no harm, we will err on that side, rather than just being reckless and I don't care, it's all about me, I'm going to do what I want and I don't care who suffers. Then you've fallen into a service to self path. And again, we get to explore and play around with this variety, as we're learning. And so um, it creates kind of part of the flavor and the drama of life. Um, you have to have an ego. You have to have a separate self, and so you have to make sure you don't die. Someone else can't eat for you, so you have to do what it takes to keep you alive. But you don't have to glorify that ego to the extent that it encroaches upon the will of others. If you are subjugating and manipulating or limiting the free will of others and harming others, then you're stepping out of bounds. You're taking things that aren't yours, so you mistake things, and so you've got to learn that sense of unity and that conscious oneness. Um, what else can I say? So yeah, we're all doing what's best for ourself and our evolution and growth, and some people might need bigger lessons than others. But it's ultimately about working and weaving into the whole in the most beneficial way possible, is what I see as being good. And so we can aspire in that direction. Um, I see, like, as thinking about spirit and matter being two opposite poles, kind of. Well, spirit I see is like, non-physical, and it's condensed into physicality. Well, when you have physicality, you have like rocks, and then up to plants and animals. After animals, with humans, you get a sense of I. You become self-aware, and so you have to develop that self-awareness, that personality, so that you can serve. You have to have an I before I can make a choice. And so you do develop that sense of self, which is separate. You can't think, I am my friend or my mother or whoever. You have to say, I am myself, and know those boundaries. But once you have perfected and fortified the personality, then it's about using that, your separate self, your individuality, your personality, in service to the whole. It's about plugging it in. It's not about being better than or separate from the rest. So when you pull in that direction, it's like you are overextending that self-importance beyond its usefulness and in the bigger picture of things. Um, also said, something about the fact that we all eat. We are in a body, so we do have to eat. And I kind of think that the fact that we take a life to survive, to eat in some form or another, I find like it might be tied to our death, the karma of it. We kill and kill and kill, and eventually we die ourselves. Perhaps there is a way to generate food without taking a life. And when I think about that possibility, that seems like it could be part to a longevity, but I'm getting into some speculation there, and I'm also considering fourth density beings of consciousness when I think about that. But again, just to kind of summarize everything, um, good is about doing no harm. It is about being in service to the whole, which one is a part. So serving oneself and the whole, doing what's best for the greatest number of people. Service to self is serving oneself and doing what one wants at the expense of or in exploitation of others. It's separating from the whole, which is ultimately delusional because you only have what is. And so to try and be what is not, ends in folly. It does not, it can only take you so far. You can only explore that path so long. And if you get kind of grossly out of proportion with how you explore that path, you may be redirected in a forceful way, if you won't get it in any other way. So hopefully that's given you something to think about. I'm sure there is more that I could talk about, and I'm sure there's points that I've missed. But that has covered the gist of what I kind of put out there. So hopefully that has given food for thought. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to see more of me, I do have a website at www.archetypeintuitive.com, and you can read other things that I've written there, contact me, and see some of the other things that I have to offer. So thanks a lot for tuning in. Bye.